And welcome to the first in a series on filters in landscape photography. I'm going to show you how to use them to improve your images. So I actually have a confession. I know it's a bit early to start with the confessions, but I don't use filters very often. This is despite the fact I've owned them since I've been a landscape photographer. I read the books. They said I needed filters. I went out and bought a set of filters. I don't know why I haven't used them. Perhaps it's because they're actually a bit of a faff to use them. But no, I haven't used them up until quite recently actually. I was doing some long exposures on the coast and that got me thinking, should I be using filters in my landscape photography more? So I decided to make this video, and hopefully it'd be useful for those thinking about buying some filters, or perhaps if you've bought some filters already and you're not quite sure how to use them, then this video will hopefully show you how to use both the circular polarizing filter and the ND filter, or neutral density filter. In this first episode, we're going to cover the circular polarizing filter, and then depending on how we go for time, there might be one or two more episodes on the solid neutral density filter and the graduated neutral density filter. So starting with the circular polarizing filter, I guess let's start with what is polarized light. Now, this certainly isn't a physics lesson. That's good, because I'd be no good at telling you what polarized light is, but I can certainly help explain the effect polarized light has on our images and on our sensor and in our eyes when we're out there taking photos. So polarized light, essentially what happens when sunlight or light is reflected off non-metallic surfaces, it becomes polarized. And we see that as glare or scatter of light on those surfaces, and that, as you know, is quite distracting on an image. And so where do we see that? Well, you might see that on the surface of water. So on a lake, you might just see reflection, so a glare. Reflections can be quite good, but if you've just got the right angle of light, you'll just see that as glare on there. You'll also see that on wet rocks, wet beaches. You'll also see it in the atmosphere. So when you look up into a blue sky, what you're actually seeing is lots of scattered light. And the light that comes through the atmosphere is scattered or polarized by the water droplets and the particles in the atmosphere, and we can sometimes see that as haze. And lastly, you'll see that even on foliage. So wet foliage would look desaturated compared to when we look at it with a polarizing filter on. And I have a couple of images to show you. So this is the surface of water. Firstly, you'll see this without a polarizing filter attached. So you'll see that glare and the bright reflections on the top of the water. And then secondly, with the polarizing filter, and you can actually see there that now we can see into the water. And so you often want to use a circular polarizer if you're using a wide angle lens and you actually want to get some of perhaps the rocks at the bottom of a pool into your image. My second image, so this is a waterfall, I think it was in Montana, and as you see here, because we've got the polarizing filter on, we've got a beautiful blue sky. So how do we use a polarizing filter, and what do they look like? So here we have a polarizing filter, and there's actually probably worth at this point explaining that in terms of filters on cameras, there are two systems. There are the type that screw directly into the end of your lens, So screw into here like this, and you know you've got threads on the inside of there, which you know if you've used a UV filter, which people often do as a lens protector. They screw into the end there. Those can be stacked, so you can put a circular polarizing filter on, and then you can put an ND filter on top of that. I mean, those are great, and they have some advantages, but they do have the big disadvantage of the lenses that you have. And if you're anything like me, these will come in different diameters, and so for every diameter of lens you'll need a different set of filters. And with these costing, you know, over £100 each, or you know, can be over £100 each, then very quickly you're spending a lot of money if you've got 3 or 4 lenses. The other type is called the slot filter type, and this is somewhat more complex in terms of the various parts that you need. But firstly, we have the adapters. So these come in different sizes, and these screw onto the end of your, if I get the right one, they screw onto the end of your lens like so. And these tend to be pretty cheap, so about £10. So you can have one set of these for all of your different lenses, and then you have the rest of the bits and pieces that you need to make it work, and you only need sort of one size of filter and these bits. So how this then works is you've got your adapter ring on here, and then you screw your next piece of metal on here like so. Okay, now you've got 2 pieces of metal attached to your camera and you still don't have any filters. So the next part of the puzzle is fitting your circular polarizer, which then screws on here like so. And what we'll cover next time is the next part of that piece of the puzzle, which is the slot holder. So slot holder, and we have filter here, slides in the slot there, but we'll cover that next time. So as you can see, you've got multiple parts to fit, but you do have then the advantage of only having to buy one set of the expensive bit, which is the filters to fit every lens on your camera. So now we've got the polarizing filter onto our camera. I think one thing you'll be obvious is that this moves around here, and the reason this moves around and actually rotates the polarizer is because depending on the angle of this to the light that's coming into your sensor, then the degree of polarization that you'll see is more or less. So you'll either get more or less glare from the surfaces, and you'll get more or less saturation. And so tend to have this on a tripod focused on perhaps the surface of the water, and you'll move this around until you essentially see the effect that you want to see through your viewfinder or the monitor on the back of the camera. There's a couple of things to be made aware of when using a polarizing filter. So firstly, on a cloudy day, you're not going to see much effect from using a polarizing filter at all. The other thing is that depending on the angle that you are to the sun, so if the sun is up here to our side, we may see a much greater amount of effect from using the polarizing filter than if the sun was directly ahead of us. So that's something to be aware of as well. And lastly, I just wanted to make you aware of is a circular polarizer can provide up to 2 stops of light. It will reduce the amount of light reaching your center by 2 stops. And a stop of light is a measure of, it's a relative measure of how much light is entering your camera. So if I reduce the amount of light entering my camera by 1 stop, then that means I'm reducing it by 50%. So only half the amount of light is entering my sensor. If I do it by 2 stops, that means I'm doing it by 50% and then 50% again. So that's how stops work. And so a polarizing filter can provide up to 2 stops of light, and that means it will extend your exposure. So it's a pretty good idea if you're going to use a polarizer to be aware of that. I mean, I generally shoot with it on a tripod anyway, but be aware that it will slightly extend your shutter speed. So that's the first part of my series on filters done. If you have any questions, then put them in the comments. If you liked, then please like, and perhaps subscribe and join me on my next video, where I'll be talking about neutral density filters.